Roma that came with them were contingents of the Ottoman armies. So that military connection was still there. When they showed up, the Europeans first of all thought that the Roma must be Turks. But then they realized, well, they don't look like Turks. They're not speaking Turkish. They're not Muslims. We're not sure what they are. Egyptians, something. But whatever they were considered to be, they were pretty quickly made slaves. And that's significant. That third migration into Europe became enslaved in Turkish-occupied Europe, which during that early period consisted of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, which today is Romania, and they became slaves. We have documents, bills of sale for Romani slaves from the 1300s, and they were kept there. That slavery lasted until about 1860. Very long time, and it was pretty horrible slavery, and it hasn't been a part of the history books. But it's if you get my book, there's a chapter in there on it. But I have an earlier book that is out of print, but you can download it. The whole thing is digitized. You can download it off of the web. It's called The Pariah Syndrome, and it's a much more detailed study of that slavery. That third wave group are the ancestors of the largest Romani population in North and South America. When slavery was abolished in Europe at that time, there was a scramble to get away from slave-holding parts of Europe. Those who were closest to the eastern border, which is to say Russia, Ukraine, crossed over and went up that way. Those who were closer to the western border came over into Serbia or went into Greece and kept coming to the Americas. And so most Romani Americans descend from that we call Vlach, because of Wallachia, Wallach population. But they certainly weren't the first ones coming to the Americas. The earliest record we have of a Romani presence in America is of 3 Roma on Columbus's second voyage in 1498. They were not willing emigrants. They were being transported because the Western Europeans wanted to get rid of Roma any way possible. In Eastern Europe there was slavery. In Western Europe there were the overseas colonies, and so Roma were being shipped off, and the history of Roma in North and South America is quite interesting, being sent here by the English, the Scottish, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch. Just goes on. So that is what we understand now of our history, and there are some interesting and important aspects resulting from this new understanding that give us an insight into what the situation is for Roma. First of all, our identity as a people happened in Anatolia. Well, geographically it's on the Asian side, but culturally it was the West. Remember, it was Christian, it was Greek-speaking. So our identity as a people happened on the doorstep of the West. So we are an Asian people. Our culture, and I'll say a bit about that, our language, our bloodline is Asian. but we're Western. So that is a problem right there. And this is important for national administrations, governments to understand that, and they don't understand that. And the reason they have so much of a problem trying to assimilate us, which is what they want to do. We don't particularly want to be assimilated, but we like to be integrated, and there is a difference. But until they understand that there are deep-rooted cultural and linguistic differences, ways of thinking between Roma and what we call Gaje, which is non-Roma, then they're never going to be able to accommodate us in a fair way. So that's one thing. It's like a square peg in a round hole. The other thing is that as we were taking shape as a people, we were also splitting up and leaving. So we didn't complete the formation of our identity in one place and then start to move out. We started to leave as it was happening, which means that if we've got the first move into Europe happening, let's say in 1200 even, and the last one happening in 13 or 1400, that's a lot of time between, and if one group ends up in Russia and another one ends up in Spain, that's hundreds and hundreds of miles, and they've been apart for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we do not have a sense of one single identity. Some of us who are politically active want to see that, and we talk about unification. I used to talk about reunification, but that was idealistic. We cannot be reunified if we were never unified to start with. But we can certainly be unified. But before we can accomplish that, we have to know who we are and where we come from. And the fact is, most Roma still don't know that. And because we don't know it, we're not able to tell the non-Romani world exactly who we are, which allows them to play with our identity and call us whatever they want and transfer fantasy onto us. And that brings me back to where does all of this stuff come from, this gypsies, tramps, and heat and so on. And to explain that, we have to go back to this same period of the Enlightenment, around the same time that this breakthrough happened with the Indian connection. This was also when the Industrial Revolution started. The Industrial Revolution rested on the invention of internal combustion engines, steam engines, and so on, which of course required fuel, coal, and put a lot of people out of work. And it created an underclass, a social underclass, agricultural, becoming urban, and so on. And Western countries began to change. They became, especially the cities, let's think of London, for example, in 1830, 1840, grim and dirty, kids being sent down coal mines, and there was a longing for a lost rural time. And you can get a picture of how bleak it was if you read Charles Dickens, for example. But if you look at the poetry and the art from that period, it's all shepherdesses and meadows and fields and so on. And the gypsies came to represent the children of nature who had not been affected by industrialization. At the same time that this sort of association was happening, racism was happening too. And that was the result of colonization overseas, the oppression of non-white populations by white populations, and the fear of race mixing, and the idea of pure races and mixed races, and the dangers of mixed race. Part of that danger was political too. There was a fear that if there were colonized people who had some white in them, they might get above their station and want to take over. That was a real fear. And so the idea of pure races and the pure gypsy, called the true Romani in the English tradition. And the true Romani was dark brown, black eyes, black hair, lived in a wagon, stole a chicken or two, ate nuts and berries, played a guitar, got into mischief a little bit, but really didn't do anything terrible. Sort of a lovable rogue, romantic, free, very free, free from 9 to 5 routine, free from hygiene, all right? Free from moral restrictions. All of this stuff was transferred to this image which was being bolstered in literature. And there are a couple of writers from this period, one in particular, somebody called George Borrow, wrote a number of books in the middle of the 1800s that reinforced this image of the true Romani. Of course, after all these centuries, there are no Roma anywhere in the world, and there's about 12 million of us, there are no Roma who are of unmixed Indian descent. No way. Which means all Roma are mixed. It's just a matter of how mixed. Most of the Romani population in the British Isles is mixed, especially. For one thing, the British Isles are separate from the rest of Europe, and so it's been sort of self-contained and mixed more with the local population, so there's more white in the Romani population, who actually are the Romani population. But the racist attitudes allowed the government and the church and so on to say, well, these people are not really gypsies. They're kind of half-breed mongrels, and we don't have to worry about them. The true gypsy lives out in the woods, and you never see him anyway, but he's the romantic character. And that's still there. This attitude is still there. And while this literary gypsy was taking shape, the actual Romani population didn't know it was happening. They didn't go to school. They didn't read and write. They weren't in a position to challenge it and say, no, that's not us. You've made up an image. This is who we really are. Nobody said that. And it's actually only now that we are doing that and saying, no, you cannot keep calling us what you call us, even today. This is insulting. You could say, well, it's just fun. And sure, but when you watch these TV shows about the mafia and crime bosses and godfathers and so on, you know at the same time they don't represent all Italians. You learn about Botticelli and Michelangelo, and you know what Italians have given the world, and you know that the mafia image is kind of a fiction. I mean, there are mafiosi for sure, but that has been exploited for entertainment, really. The difference is that people know about gypsies, they don't know so much about Roma. So what we want to do is say, okay, love your Esmeralda, love your Carmen, but understand that those are creations by non-Roma. They are not us. And if you want to know about us, now's your chance to ask some questions, which is a good segue. So if you have some questions, you could ask me about the culture, because I haven't said much about that. Yeah?
said that the Roma came up with the Turks as soldiers, and then they were went into slavery. How did that occur?
How did Roma come to be called Turks?
Well, you said they came with the Turks in a military way.
Yeah.
And then they were enslaved for a while. How?
Well, they were service providers to the troop. They weren't fighters for the Turks. And we're still working on this aspect of the history. There are a couple of historians in Bulgaria who are examining this. And the question is, might they have been slaves already on the Ottoman side, even before coming into Europe? We just don't know enough.
So they weren't protected by that association?
No. But what's interesting is that the Romnichal Romanis, that is to say, the Romani population in this country who've come here from Britain, and it's a big population, and in fact, a representative will be here on the 5th of May, which is Mario. You'll have to come and listen to him, Mario Williams. The Romnichal word for the Vlach Romanis here is Turks. It's a misnomer, but that's the common word used for them. Yeah.
Well, you want to talk about the culture?
Yeah.
I want to hear it.
One of the reasons for the barrier between us and y'all is cultural. And it's traceable to India, and it has to do with this notion of ritual purity and ritual pollution. And a lot of books say we don't have a religion. Or if they want to talk about our religion, they say, well, some are Muslims, some are Orthodox Christians, some are Catholics, and so on. But those are all religions picked up from outside. We do have our own religion, but we don't regard it as a religion because we live it all the time. It's not something saved for Saturday or Sunday. It has to do with maintaining spiritual balance. And the balance is only maintained by living in the right way. And that means how you interact with everything around you, men and women, how you prepare food, how you wash things. Everything has to be done in the right way. And it gets quite complicated. You could have 3 different bowls for washing 3 different types of things: clothes, food, bed sheets, and so on. If you stray from that behavior, it's like you have a seesaw, a teeter-totter. It has to be kept like this. And if you don't live properly, it starts to tip. And once it starts to tip, bad things happen. Bad luck, bad health, and so on. Your behavior is watched by what we call mule, which is the spirits of dead family, and so on. And they kind of guide you. And if you do so, here's an example I always use, but we are not supposed to let food or plates or knives and things fall on the floor. You cannot pick them up and wash them off and keep using them. But if you were to do that, then there would be something bad would happen. And it wouldn't be coincidence, it would be what we call prikaza. It's like retribution, because the mule would be sending you a little message. You understand? From a Romani point of view, nothing is a coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. Everything is the result of something else. Now, obviously some Romani families are much stricter about this sort of thing than others. And the Vlach people are really strict. If you are not spiritually clean, you can sort of infect other people. If you don't prepare a meal properly and I eat that meal, I can be contaminated spiritually. I may be squeaky clean. I might have had 10 showers. But, and there's different words. There's a word that means dirty, which is melalo, but that's dirty with dirt. There's a word that means dirty spiritually, which, they're different words, but machadi, machado, marime, different words like that. And gaje, non-Romani people are seen to be unclean, not inherently, but because they don't follow the behavior. If a white girl married a Romani boy, she would have to learn how to behave, how to cook, how to do everything, how to behave. And then she would be spiritually clean too. And I say a girl marrying a boy because opposite from Jews, for us the descent is through the father. For Jews it's through the mother. If my daughter married a non-Romani boy, she would become the daughter of his family. She'd become his daughter.